Okay. We can keep chatting, but we're live now. I just want to let you know that. A welcome, hopefully a welcome to all of you that are gathered with us by way of our live stream. Turns out that we had problems with our morning worship service. Our server was down, and so Robin was scrambling for the whole hour, trying to get it back up, working with our provider, and they seem to identify what it is and some remedies going forward, but we don't really have, that didn't do much for that actual service, but they said that they believe that this service and then our late service should be okay, so we will find that out. Good. It was not, because our server was down, yes. Okay. Good. Well, that means that something's working right now. We like that. Okay. And so, yes, we have our study will be on Exodus. We're going to just continue on where we left off with our Genesis study, and we're then going to go into this the next book, which some might say is it is probably in Exodus is the most referred to text in all of the Holy Scriptures. And it is, we would think it's John 3:16, right? Okay, well, that's not true. That's not true. It might, and it may be today with individuals referencing it, but the entire, all of the Old Testament prophets, Christ himself, all of the apostles, all of the church, what did they reference? No, that's a good thought. What was it that they referenced? Moses, the Passover, the wilderness journey, and the Passover, this is where it's recorded. And it is really, I don't want to call it the centrality of our faith, but it is the central image that was to point people to the cross and point people to the atonement that has been made for us. And so when you listen to when you would read the Old Testament prophets, the apostles, and Christ himself, they always pointed you back to what God did, bringing his people out of Egypt, and how he did it. And that was always to be pointing you to how God will restore all from our wilderness journey. And so that's really what, that is the main focus really of Exodus. Now, when I say the main focus, there are many commentators and many even pastors, Bible study leaders, that'll tell you that the main focus of Exodus is the Ten Commandments and the setting up of the laws and the setting up of the setting up of the way of the form of worship and all of those kind of things. And the reason that they say that is because it takes up the majority of the book of Exodus. But really, all of that is moot without the atonement, without the Day of Atonement, without the Passover of God bringing his people out of bondage and into freedom. And so then there'll be, and you'll find others, depending on where you go. If you are going to have Bible study leaders or pastors or whomever that are more focused on social justice or things along those lines, what they're going to be taking a look at is they're going to take the book of Exodus and they're going to make it, and they're going to turn it political. And they're going to talk about how Exodus shows the releasing of the slaves into freedom. When in fact, the significance is that it is a typology. It is a pointing towards God releasing us from the slavery of sin. And what happens is, when we forget about that, when we focus on, the political stance, or when we focus on, the worship and the ceremonial laws and all that, and we do it at the expense of God rescuing His people because they couldn't rescue themselves, we miss God. And we miss who God is. And so that is, those are some things that I think are really important as we now head into this book. The book, anybody know what the word Exodus means? Going out, yes. Leaving, going out, departure, whatever the case may be. And so the focus is, the entire book is about of God's rescuing His people and leading them out of slavery and into freedom. Now, what you don't see in Exodus is you don't see them get all the way to the Promised Land. That'll kind of work its way as we get into Moses' final book of Deuteronomy, is where we really see it. We really see that ultimately occur when he brings them to the edge of the River Jordan, and it is there that he reminds us that I led you there and I don't get to go, that type of thing, and so we'll see him we'll see that end at the River Jordan at the end of Deuteronomy, which is the end of Moses' books, and then the book of Joshua is where it kind of picks up in the as Joshua then leads them into the Promised Land. So, but this really does talk about Israel's departure from Egypt, so that they can return back to the Promised Land of Canaan. But its significance really is the atonement. That is, I think that's something just to keep that in mind. We know that Moses is the author, and we know Moses is the author of all the 5 books, because this is Jesus references that. Jesus will speak of when he speaks of the Bible. Now again, remember when he speaks of the Bible, there is no New Testament yet. So the whole Bible is the Old Testament. And when he speaks of the whole Bible, he breaks it into 3 parts. Anybody know what the 3 parts are?
Well, the first 5 books are the Pentateuch.
Right. What does Jesus call that?
Moses or the law?
The law of Moses. You're right. Yeah, just add all your words together. The law of Moses. He calls it the law of Moses. Yeah. We would call it the first 5 books, or the Pentateuch, which just means 5, right? Those are Moses, but he always speaks of the books of the book of the law. That is, or the book of the law, or the law of Moses. So we know through Jesus that it was Moses that wrote these first 5 books, right? And then what are the other 2? Anybody remember what the other 2? The law of Moses. The prophets. It's a phrase. The law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. He splits the whole Bible into 3 sections. He splits it into the Law of Moses, first 5 books, all the prophets, and then the books of poetry. And he specifically says the Psalms. What he doesn't reference, interesting, as he talks about God's Word, is he doesn't talk about the historical books, which is really very interesting. It is really, those are how Christ separates God's Word for us and how he references it. So that's also kind of interesting. What we're going to see is that this book of this journey of the people, the Israelites, to Egypt. Anybody know how long that journey was? How long? I mean, from the time they got there till the time they got out. 430 years. Yeah, 430 years, and so that is something, and that gets picked up really in the New Testament. Well, and we also see, I think once we get into Exodus, I'm guessing middle to later of the book, it'll speak of the 430 years that they were there. But yeah, so they were. So what the context of Exodus is that it is 400. It was 430 years to get us to this point. So from the end of Genesis, or just right near the end of Genesis, when all the people came to this point here, is 430 years. And interesting, we have no other recordings of God to his people in between those times. Moses goes from Genesis, where it speaks of Israel, of Jacob bringing the people there, or getting the people there through Joseph, right? And then he picks it up here in Exodus, and there's no other reference. God is silent. Now, it doesn't appear that they were silent of their worship. It appears that circumcision still went on, worshiping still went on, God was still continuing to bless them, none of those kind of things. But there is no reference of God speaking to them. There's another time where we see the same thing, and that is in between the end of what we call our Old Testament and the beginning of our New Testament. There's also a 400-year gap in there. Okay? I mean, it's interesting because when you take a look, our nation is what, 250 years old? Okay? Israel was in, bondage to Egypt, almost twice as long as we've been a nation. That's a pretty significant amount of time as we take a look at that. Well, then we would see Moses describes this in the first couple of chapters, and then from chapters 4 through 40, which is the rest of the book, that entire span is going to take place in the period of less than 2 years. So, kind of keep that in mind. 430 years gets us to the end of chapter 3, up to chapter 3, and then from 4 on to 40, that's another 2 years. So, that's why we know that they didn't get into the promised land in the book of Exodus, because that wilderness journey is going to be 40 years. And this really only covers the first 2 of those 40 years. The others will be covered later. Okay. So, I think that was all my notes that I wanted to share with you. All right. So, now, let's begin. Oh, one other thing. I wanted to share this with you here, and I just had some notes regarding, because Moses is going to talk about, at the beginning of this, he's going to talk about a Pharaoh that didn't know Joseph. Okay? So as we go through this, the Pharaoh that is going to be opposing, or that's going to be the opposition here, and this is how they're able to really date the way they're really going to be able to date the book of Exodus and when it actually happens. That it is the king that didn't know Joseph was going to come out of the dynasty that had expelled the Hyksos dynasty, which was that was a Semitic tribe that ruled Egypt throughout the 16th century BC. And then they would fall into, from there, they're going to fall into this period of what they're going to call the New Kingdom. And that New Kingdom is going to rule the next 500 years, from like 1500 BC to 1000 BC, right in that area. And that Pharaoh would be Thutmose III. Thutmose III, he ruled from about 1500 to 1450 BC. And then he's the one that didn't know Moses. And he's the one that kind of started to, excuse me, he's the one that started to create a very miserable life for the Israelites. And then the Pharaoh of the Exodus, who's going to pick it up after Thutmose, is going to be Amenhotep. I think I spelled it. I think that's right. Amenhotep. Amenhotep. And he is he's going to rule from like 1450 to 1425. And so he would be during the period of when they are going to leave. So he would be the Pharaoh that would have been portrayed by Yul Brynner. Even though they gave Yul Brynner a different name, probably because they couldn't pronounce it the same way I couldn't pronounce it, Amenhotep. So that would be, so if you picture it with your Ten Commandments movie kind of thing, that would be Yul Brynner. And interesting, I know there's a lot of little bits of history, but I want to share this with you before we get into Exodus, because it's kind of interesting to me. If it's interesting to me, you're forced to have to listen to it. The other thing is, if you go into the archives of Egyptian history, you don't see the Exodus. It's not recorded. Why do you think it's not recorded?
I mean, who would want to read about that?
Who would want to? Yeah, it would be a black mark on a time when Egypt thought that it was, 10 feet tall and invincible. Yeah. So it just never got written about. I don't know which is right. Yeah. So what we see is that it is not revisionist history has been going on forever. We're not going to be the only nation that's going to have its history books all revised to look completely different than what probably really happened. I mean, that's what goes on, is that if it's something you don't like, you don't talk about it.
Or the Egyptians are known to erase things too.
They're known to erase.
They carve things out. So
Okay.
If they don't like something, they'll just cut it out.
There's the point.
Something over the top.
See, interesting. Isn't that something though? How we could probably say that about our nation. How many times as we studied history, did we maybe not study all of the ugliness of some of our history because no one ever wrote about it? Finally, when you get the stones to write about it, now you put it in, and now we begin to change history. Now maybe you look at people in a little different way than you looked at them before. Maybe some of the patriarchs of our nation, or whatever the case may be. But you see, it's been going on forever. That revisionist history you write based off of what you want people to know about you. And if that's, wait till you see what my revisionist history will be about me. The book about me is going to be phenomenal. It will be phenomenal. So, while I want to share some of this with you, understand this: none of it is of absolute certainty. Okay? Only because, we don't have it directly from the Word of God, that historical piece, and Egypt Egypt doesn't have it. And so what we have is some other historians that have tried to piece things together. We're not exactly sure that this is all the way it's supposed to be, but we're pretty close.
Which Pharaoh is the grandpa of Moses?
That would be the, it would be the one he would have been the one that would be just before the one of the Exodus. And that one's not recorded. We don't know. So, is he as good nature of a guy that we see on the Ten Commandments? No. See, what he did on the Ten Commandments is he took kind of like the history of the Pharaoh, maybe of a few hundred years earlier, and what they did was he just kind of crunched it together to be Yul Brynner's dad. Okay, but it really wasn't. I mean, Moses, the grandfather of, it would not be really the grandfather, it's the uncle, right? Because it was the daughter of Pharaoh, so it'd be grandfather. They were already being oppressed. So he was a nasty dude already. So, and really that was going on in the movie too. They had been oppressed for a long time. So as nice as they made that old grandpa to look, he was not. And so you got to kind of, that was done for, to make an interesting movie. So, all right, let's dive into this. Now, I have a microphone for someone, and if somebody wants to do the first 7 verses, that would be great. Anybody? All right, I'll pretend I'm Steve. So, all right. So, first 7 verses.
These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Okay,
so very quickly, based off of some of the other books that we have begun, what is the purpose of those first 7 verses? To tie in with the other, yes. Yeah, that's all it is. It would be like if you're ever reading a novel of a specific series, and I like to read, series novels. The next novel coming up, there's always a paragraph or two in the first chapter that kind of ties it together, with the other one. It at least puts it into a time frame or tells you where the people have been since they ended, that kind of thing. That's all this is. So keep that in mind. But also note that the people of Israel were fruitful. They increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong. There was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 600,000 to 700,000 men now by that time, plus all the women and children. That's how busy those 12 brothers got, and how their families over the course of the years had just, they took God seriously when God says, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And they did. So that is that's an important thing. Here's the other thing that I think is, we don't think about it so much. The people of God get a new name beginning at the beginning of Exodus. What's their new name? Sons of Israel or Israelites. Israelites. They weren't called that before. So from this point forward, as Moses writes his books, the people of Israel are going to be called Israelites. In the same way that all of the other nations, you have Amalekites and Jebusites and all those, they came from those families. Amalek, they came from Jebu, those types of things, and so they became the so-and-so sites. Well, the same thing. These are the people of Israel. They're the Israelites. Get a new name. I just kind of interesting. You don't think about it. It just all of a sudden get it. It's like us when you think about it. After Christ's crucifixion, the people of God, they take on a new name early in the book of Acts. The church does, and that new name is called the Way. That's what they were called. It would be like if Berea was the church, it would be Berea, the Church of the Way, would be the name of our church, right? And then that changed. And what did that change to? Christians. They now call us by a new name. They call us Christians, and what is that? It takes away our name, and it gives us Christ's name. Where interesting here we see that in the Old Testament, the name God gives them is the name of their forefather, the Israelites. But after the cross, we are not known by our own names anymore. We are known by the name Christian. So that is how God sees you and how he sees me. That's the name that has been placed upon us. Okay, so let's now go from verse 8 until, somebody want to read 8 to 14?
This is an aside, but someone from Luther Manor told me that they love to hear Nathan read. His voice is so...
There you go. There you go. You have fans. Tell them if they ever want autographs, we could probably make that happen. But Nathan doesn't do them for free. So, we can do an autograph signing at some time if they really want. Poor guy turned red. Wow. Good thing the camera's not on you. I'm sorry. That's mean. So, go ahead.
Now there rose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and, if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves, and made their lives bitter with hard service, in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves.
Okay. So here we see that Egypt has a concern, and it's probably from the standpoint of the as nation leaders, I think it's a legitimate concern, but they could have done that in a different way. They certainly could have probably dealt with it internally, directly with the Israelites, and formed partnerships, formed associations where they remain loyal with each other. All those kind of things. But they chose to go a different route, and they said, we are going to deal with them crafty way. And so what they did is they oppressed them. And as they oppressed them, we see what happens is God continues to bless them. He continues to grow their nation. And grow and grow and grow, to the point where, like I said, there were probably 600,000 men. So you're talking approximately 1 million people. All right? Which my guess would be that there were many more Israelites than there were Egyptians.
Well, and that is a clue there because, it says escape from the land.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if they wanted him out, they could have kicked him out.
Yeah.
But if they were going to, they were probably useful to them.
Yeah, they were, and that's exactly right. And so they could have done it through the form of, some type of a partnership or some type of concord of binding, that type of thing. But you don't see that. What they're going to do is isn't it interesting how a nation of fewer people can oppress a nation of greater amount of people? I think it's really, you would think that at just from the standpoint of sheer numbers, you can overpower, but they certainly weren't able to do that. And so they made their lives bitter and hard. Okay. So now let's get to the final verses of that chapter, 15 to 22. Anybody?
And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, when you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then ye shall live. She shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives, and said unto them, why have you done this thing, and have saved the men children alive? And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively, and are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them. Therefore God dwelt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive.
Okay. All right. So here we have now the king of Egypt, as these people continue to grow, you can see the king of Egypt's pretty concerned about this. And so he goes to the midwives who are caring for, who are the birthing nurses for the Hebrew women. And here's, I think, something very interesting in chapter 15. We know that there's more than two, right? When you have that many people, there's going to be more than two. But they name two of them, okay? What do you think the significance is of that? I'm probably setting you up for something, but what do you think the significance is of God naming, or Moses naming them?
Perhaps those are the only two that disobeyed.
There's a possibility. That's a great point. Maybe they are the only two that disobeyed Pharaoh and trusted in God. But what we see here is that they are, as children of God and favored of God, they're given names. Who's not given a name in this so far? Pharaoh. He's never given a name. Never. That I think is very interesting, in that he's referenced as king or as Pharaoh, but he's never given a name. And yet these two midwives, right? They're, probably insignificant in the scheme of all of the nation. They get names. And I think that's just something I thought was very interesting. And then what they see here, when you serve as a midwife to the Hebrew women, and you see them on the birth stool. Anybody know what the birth stool is? Okay, the birth stool. They the actual Hebrew translation for birth stool is 2 stones. 2 stones. So, what? There you go. That's exactly right. That would be the ancient version of the stirrups in the doctor's office. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. So they say when you see them on these birth stools, right? Then so when you are giving birth, is what they are saying. Kill the male children. The female now can live. Now, I think this is really interesting. If they really wanted to, if you think from a strategy standpoint, if you really wanted to eliminate or minimize the amount of people, who would you kill, the men or the women? The women. Yeah. You can't have. If you can't have children, you can't grow as a nation, right? But he went the other way, and he decided to kill the males. And again, all of this we see in God's plans.
Well, it's a possibility that the Egyptians needed the women, though. So they just take the women in.
The women.
And so the Egyptians.
There's the other piece. The women, maybe the women were much more useful than men. There's a surprise, right? Right? Okay. Women are they can do a whole lot more than us lazy guys can do. So, yeah, absolutely. That's another possibility. And so, but if they really did want to eliminate, that's what you could have done. So it says, but the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian, and then I love their line. The Hebrew women aren't like the Egyptian women, or the Hebrew women, they just go out in the fields and they pop them right out in the fields. Egyptian women don't do that, right? Here's the part that I think is the most interesting about that. If you're Pharaoh, try to pretend you're Pharaoh. And they give you that as their excuse. What are you thinking?
They're lying through their teeth.
Yeah, that's what I would be. I would be, yeah, really? You know, note that Pharaoh never pursues it any farther than that.
Or maybe he knew that the Hebrew women were stronger than the Egyptians.
Maybe.
Maybe he just went,
Maybe, or maybe God is going to speak of him in the same way that he speaks of Satan, as we talked about in our scriptures or in our sermon today, that he's just a fool. He's just not that smart. Isn't it? It's really interesting how it really diminishes the Pharaoh and who he, and who he is. I think that's kind of just an interesting little thought there. And so what does Pharaoh do? Pharaoh just kind of gets madder and deals with it a little more harshly. And so, because now note that we get to verse 20, first, 20 to 22, God deals well with the midwives. And again, I don't think he's just speaking of these two midwives. He's probably speaking about all of them because they're all following along the lines of the Shiphrah and Puah. And then it says, because they feared God, he gave them, now I think Emily said he gave them houses, but it's really not what he gave them. He gave them families. So the midwives, it was interesting. The midwives were those who would care for, help care for the women who were having children, but maybe they weren't fortunate enough to have children of their own or to be married, whatever the case may be. And God blesses them with abundant wombs. And so they could have families of their own. It was a great blessing by God for them. And the fact that it's spoken of as a blessing tells you that for them, it was probably something that they longed for or wished was theirs. Something along those lines. And then we see him go, instead of to the midwives, now Pharaoh commands all the people. Every son that is born of the Hebrews, you need to cast them into the Nile. Now, I think that is, that is really very interesting about the Nile. Anybody know how the Egyptians understood the Nile or saw the Nile to be?
Was it sacred?
Yeah, sacred. Anybody else?
well, it was the source of their wealth.
It was because it was the Nile that made their land so prosperous and abundant in its growing and everything, that they saw the Nile as the source of life. So they saw the Nile as a source of life, and here's how they were so against the Israelites and this fear of the Israelites that they were willing to desecrate this river of life by throwing bodies into it. So I mean that just shows you the fear and the anger that they had. Okay, so we have, I don't know, what time do we have? We're at 11 o'clock, so I think we'll stop right there. Otherwise, because we could have dealt with Moses. We'll start with, that's a good place we'll pick up next week, and we'll get the birth of Moses, and then maybe it'll get us into chapter 3, which is chapter 2 to chapter 3 is 40 years worth of time, just so you're aware. Remember we talked about chapter 4 to 40 is 2 years worth of time. Chapter 2 to chapter 3 is 40 years. There's 40 years in between those two chapters. Okay? All right. So go and
Verse about Samuel 2:35,
Okay.
which says, "And I will raise me up a faithful priest that shall do according to that which is in mine heart and in my mind, and I will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before mine anointed forever."
Okay. Yeah, and the shore, what is the shore house is the shore house that he is speaking about is that he brings you into his family. So he brings you into what is the shore house? The shore house is the house of God.
Yeah.
The shore, yeah.
Sure is in special print.
Okay. Okay. But that would be, they're talking about bringing you into the house of God. It's King James?
It sure is.
Yeah.
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 It's like a more medieval version of house when they're talking about like families. That's just how they would talk about it. When you hear of noble houses and stuff, that's what they mean.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Here, Ethan.
Oh, I